Hi everyone, this will be a short video that will talk a little bit more about evaluating research. So before this video, make sure you have all read the Strack et al. Paper associated with this module, and that article is titled Inhibiting and Facilitating Conditions of the Human Smile, a non-obtrusive test of the facial feedback hypothesis. In particular, read the first experiment from that paper. So we can start by asking, what was this study about? It was testing the facial feedback hypothesis, which is where people's affective responses can be influenced by their own facial expression, like smiling or pouting. So in their study, they had participants rate how funny different cartoons were while they were holding a pen in their mouth. And here's a picture of what the task would look like. In one condition, participants would hold the pen with their teeth, and that would induce a smile. In another condition, participants would hold the pen with their lips, which would induce kind of a pouting or frowning face. So some details of this study, the independent variable here is how the participants held the pen, either with their teeth or with their lips. They actually had a baseline condition with holding it in their hand as well. And then the dependent variable was what they were measuring, which was the cartoon ratings of funniness. And their main finding here was that mean funniness ratings were higher when participants held the pen with their teeth compared to with their lips. This was taken as evidence in favor of the facial feedback hypothesis. So inducing smiles actually led people to think cartoons were funnier compared to when a frown was induced. The big question as critical consumers of evidence is whether you believe this finding or not. They had an adequate sample size, which was about 30 people per group, so there's nothing obviously wrong with their sample size. Their second study was actually underpowered, and this link gives a nice overview if you want to read that. But on the surface, it seemed like there weren't too many flaws in this study. This would be just a paper that it would be pretty hard to find out what was wrong with it. But just because a study was more or less methodologically sound doesn't mean that you have to believe it. As researchers, we're also allowed to have our subjective feelings or beliefs about whether something is real or not. And actually, some researchers had the same thought and they performed a replication attempt of this original experiment. They did a registered replication report, which is the best type of replication you can do. They recruited 17 independent laboratories to all do this same experiment. Then they combined all the results from all the labs and they synthesized these research findings in what's known as a meta-analysis. These researchers made sure to do everything right. They pre-registered their hypothesis, they made their analysis plan and time-stamped it before they collected any of their data, and they put all of their data and materials online for anyone to go and download from the Open Science Framework. And here are the results from the study. This figure is called a forest plot, so each row here is a different lab who did a separate replication of this effect. Then they list the means for both the smile and pout condition, and then the dots to the right of that and the lines in the middle of the graph show the effect size and its confidence interval. The effect size here is the standardized difference between the smile and pout conditions. So dots to the right of this vertical line are positive and would indicate higher ratings in the smile condition than the pout condition. Dots to the left of the vertical line would be negative, and that would indicate an opposite effect of higher ratings in the pout condition versus the smile condition. We can see here that there's some variability here in the findings, but they all pretty much hover around 0. The meta-analytic effect size is 0.03, which is pretty much effectively 0. So this was a failed replication. But if you actually read through this paper, and I have it available to download on Canvas, it's a really sound paper. They have a section called Results, Exploratory Analyses. I really like this because we've talked about that before, about running test after test after test, and how that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're transparent about it. These researchers did run additional tests, but they were upfront about it and they labeled it as exploratory research. They also said the following: this registered replication report did not replicate the result and failed to do so in a statistically compelling fashion. Nevertheless, it should be stressed that this result doesn't invalidate the more general facial feedback hypothesis. It's possible that the original paradigm that we employed does not provide a strong test of the facial feedback hypothesis, and that other procedures would provide more compelling evidence. So they didn't take the Mythbusters approach. They said up front that this doesn't invalidate the entire phenomenon and that they're always open to new and different kinds of evidence. So anyway, that's another example of some research that you can evaluate. Sometimes flaws in research are obvious, but in other cases, like this study, they aren't so obvious. In cases where they aren't obvious or there's nothing really wrong, we can turn to other research, whether it's conceptually similar experiments or replications, and then we can evaluate multiple bits of evidence to come to our conclusions. Okay, so that's it for this video, and we'll see you next time.